The neighborhood was a patchwork quilt of neatly manicured lawns and pastel-colored houses, each one a carefully crafted facade of suburban bliss. Our cul-de-sac, nestled at the edge of a sleepy town, held an eerie peace, like the calm eye of a hurricane. It was the perfect setting for an unwritten sitcom, where the quiet life of its residents was only occasionally punctuated by the shrill ring of petty drama. Amongst us, there was Karen. Karen, with her perfectly coiffed hair and penchant for rules, was the self-appointed gatekeeper of our little community. Her house, a bastion of order with its symmetrical flower beds and pristine porch, sat at the center of the cul-de-sac, an unyielding fortress of her own making. Her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. Not even the slightest transgression escaped her watchful gaze. A week ago, the first note appeared, an anonymous reminder tucked delicately under my windshield wiper, written in a neat, exacting script. Garbage bins must be stored out of sight, it read, an echo of the HOA guidelines. I had forgotten to drag mine back from the curb the night before. A simple oversight, easily remedied. Yet, beneath the practiced politeness of the note was an undercurrent of accusation, a warning shot fired across the bow. Karen had struck. In that moment, I imagined her standing at her window, sipping from a steaming mug, satisfaction curling at the edges of her lips as she watched me retrieve the note. Her domain was one of relentless order, cultivated through a steady campaign of reminders, complaints, and meticulously filed reports. I crumpled the note in my palm, feeling its tightness, then let it fall to the floor of my car. Peace is a fragile thing. I understood this. It took effort to maintain, especially in a community where harmony was held together by thin threads of tolerance and civility. I chose to respond with silence, allowing the note to dissolve into the backdrop of my day. For now, compliance seemed the wisest course, a small concession to keep the waters still. Days passed. The air was crisp with the approach of autumn, and the trees were a riot of copper and gold. But tranquility, it seemed, was not in the cards. On the morning of trash pickup, I awoke to find my bins missing, vanished into thin air, leaving behind an empty space on the curb. A void where my refuse should have resided, awaiting collection. My first thought was of the wind, perhaps a prank by the elements, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted them. Tucked discreetly beside Karen's house, lined up like obedient soldiers. A cold realization washed over me. Karen, with her unyielding dedication to order, had confiscated my bins, deeming them misplaced artifacts of an untidy domain. I stood there, the morning sun casting long shadows across the pavement, pondering this new development. Her actions spoke volumes, a silent declaration of war wrapped in the guise of neighborhood stewardship. Yet, I felt no anger, only a quiet resolve brewing within me. A plan took root, its tendrils weaving through my thoughts with deliberate intent. Karen had blocked my trash pickup, but in doing so, she had ignited a spark. I would reclaim my peace, not with anger but with calculated irony. The seeds of my revenge were sown in that moment, and as they germinated, I imagined a future where Karen's bins would find new life as relics of her reign, preserved for posterity. For even the steadiest of kingdoms can crumble when met with the quiet power of unexpected resistance. The morning light filtered through my kitchen window, casting a gentle glow over the chaos Karen had wrought. Her latest stunt, blocking my trash pickup, lingered in my mind like a dull headache. The absurdity of her actions was almost admirable in its persistence. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, had taken the HOA rules and twisted them into a labyrinthine nightmare of compliance. Each edict she issued was more ridiculous than the last. Her latest proclamation demanded trash bins be placed at exactly a 47-degree angle to the curb, as if the precise orientation would summon divine cleanliness. Naturally, I was cited for failing to comply. The citation arrived on a thick, almost ostentatiously formal paper, embossed with the HOA's emblem. It was a parody of authority, a theatrical gesture. The text was dense with legalese, yet the pettiness bled through. A small red note in the margins. Karen's signature touch, casually accused me of setting a bad example for the neighborhood. Her campaign against me had escalated beyond mere nuisance. It was a war of attrition. But I found a quiet resolve within myself, a silent vow to stand firm. The absurdity of her rules was my ally, even as she concocted new mandates, more labyrinthine than the last. The neighborhood began to stir with whispers of dissent. The gossip spread like wildfire, a chain reaction of murmured conversations and furtive glances. Karen, oblivious to the growing undercurrent, continued her reign with an iron fist wrapped in pastel gloves. She never suspected that her empire was built on sand. I watched her from my window one afternoon as she patrolled the street, clipboard in hand, like a general surveying her troops. Her movements were mechanical, almost robotic, an embodiment of her rigid adherence to order. But I could see the cracks in her facade, the tiny fractures in her self-assurance. History, I thought, often remembers tyrants but not their rules. The day I donated her bins to the local museum, I had acted in quiet defiance. It was an unexpected maneuver, one that disrupted her narrative. She had not anticipated the audacity of my gesture. The bins, now labeled as historic relics of HOA terror, stood proudly in the museum's eclectic collection, a testament to suburban rebellion. Karen's fury was palpable. The museum's reception of her bins was a scandal, a public embarrassment that rippled through the community. Yet my act was more than mere retaliation. It was a statement against the absurdity she had imposed upon us all. As the days passed, I became a reluctant folk hero, the quiet warrior who had dared to stand against the tyrant. Neighbors began to greet me with conspiratorial smiles, their silent nods a tacit agreement of solidarity. Karen, unyielding in the face of her unraveling power, doubled down. She issued more citations, each more absurd than the last, desperate to reassert control, but I could see the futility in her eyes, a desperation masked by bravado. In the quiet recesses of my mind, I wondered how far she would go. I could sense the impending confrontation, a storm brewing on the horizon. But for now, I reveled in the irony of it all. I basked in the knowledge that sometimes the simplest acts of defiance could ripple through the fabric of authority, unraveling it stitch by stitch. The stage was set. The final act awaited, and in the silence of my own rebellion, I prepared for whatever might come next. The morning sun slipped through the curtains, casting a golden hue on my kitchen floor. I sipped my coffee, a quiet satisfaction warming me more than the brew. The neighborhood, usually undisturbed at this hour, buzzed with an undercurrent of tension. A symphony of murmurs and clinking trash bins played outside my window. Karen's absence was palpable. Her driveway, usually adorned with pristinely aligned trash bins, now lay barren, an empty stage waiting for its star. The absence spoke louder than her constant admonishments ever had, a vacuum pulling in attention from every corner of the community. The neighbors gathered in small clusters, their eyes flicking between the vacant concrete and each other's faces, seeking answers, seeking blame. In the days following the museum donation, whispers had sprouted like weeds across lawns and patios. Words like audacious and unbelievable floated through open windows, each one carrying a charge, an electric potential of scandal. I played the role of the calm observer, the eye of the storm swirling around me, my own composure a stark contrast to the growing frenzy. It was the irony that tickled me. The bins, those mundane icons of domestic order, elevated to museum exhibits. Historic relics, I'd laughingly called them, a nod to Karen's persistent attempts to fossilize our neighborhood in her image. Her need for control had been as constant as the recycling schedule, her presence as persistent as the weekly garbage collection. She had made her mark, to be sure, but now, in her absence, a different kind of mark was being considered. The neighborhood began to see the absurdity of it all, a community held captive by the whims of one who had appointed herself queen. In her silence, new voices found courage, whispering of change, of liberation from arbitrary rules. I could see them, the neighbors, glancing towards my house with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Did they suspect? Did they know? It didn't matter. The act was done. the wheels set in motion. Karen's iron grip on our lives had loosened, the chains of her restrictions left to rust alongside her donated bins. The air was thick with possibility, a rebellion, quiet yet fierce, brewed beneath the surface. Neighbors, once adherent to the unspoken rules of conformity, began to question the rules, the authority, the necessity of it all. It amused me, the thought of our neighborhood as a sleeping giant, now stirring from its slumber. It wasn't long before the Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting, a gathering of voices echoing with the timbre of change. As I stepped onto my porch, I felt their eyes, a collective gaze heavy with expectation. Karen's absence hung over the meeting like a storm cloud, but beneath that cloud, seeds of dissent took root. I joined the throng, finding a place among them, a silent participant in the unfolding drama. The meeting commenced with a tense formality, but soon the cracks began to show. Voices rose, tentative at first, then stronger, emboldened by each other's courage. And there it was, in the midst of a heated murmur, a singular voice breaking through. Enough. A word, simple yet profound, reverberating through the crowd. It was a turning point, the fulcrum upon which our neighborhood balanced precariously. In that moment, I felt the weight of my own satisfaction shift, morphing from private amusement to shared empowerment. Karen's legacy was being rewritten, her chapter drawing to a close. History, after all, is not written by those who seek to control it, but by those who dare to challenge it. There, in the twilight of Karen's reign, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh. A new chapter unfolding under the same golden sun. The morning after the museum delivery dawned with a crispness that felt like a freshly ironed shirt, ready to be worn for an occasion both ordinary and monumental. The neighborhood buzzed with an undercurrent of anticipation, a hum of whispered conspiracies and shared nods. I walked to my curb with a deliberate nonchalance, my mind replaying Karen's incredulous gasp as her garbage bins were whisked away, deemed relics of a bygone era marked by her reign. With the dawn came the garbage trucks, their rumbling approach a promise to restore routine. The driver, unaware of the saga that had unfolded, simply did his job, mechanically lifting and emptying the cans into the bowels of the truck. My trash, at last, was liberated, freed from its temporary prison of spite and pettiness. Karen's house stood silent, curtains drawn, a fortress against the gaze of the community she once ruled with an ironclad clipboard. I imagined her inside, pacing like a tiger caged by her own miscalculations. The image brought a flicker of satisfaction, tempered by the quiet knowledge that her downfall was a consequence of her own making, not my revenge. The street was busier than usual, neighbors congregating in small clusters, trading glances and snippets of conversation that needed no words to convey their meaning. There, in the center of it, was Mrs. Anderson, the unofficial historian of our little enclave. Her eyes, sharp as ever, caught mine, and a smile played on her lips. She nodded, an acknowledgement that transcended words. Community restored, the unspoken promise that this place, our shared sanctuary, would endure. Karen's absence from the scene was palpable, a void that highlighted how much space she had occupied. Without her looming presence, the neighborhood seemed to breathe easier, the air lighter, suffused with a strange camaraderie forged by shared adversity. As if we all held a piece of the same secret, the shared knowledge of a tyrant undone by her own hubris. The museum, I later heard, had accepted the bins with amused curiosity, displaying them as artifacts of suburban lore. Irony draped over the act like a well-tailored coat. Karen's legacy, her desperate grip on control, now preserved for posterity, a cautionary tale captured in faded plastic. I wondered if she had visited, standing there in the sterile gallery, face to face with the physical embodiment of her downfall. The thought was both sobering and satisfying. In the days that followed, the roses that lined my walkway bloomed with renewed vigor, as if the earth itself rejoiced in the end of Karen's tyranny. Even the birds seemed to sing more sweetly, their melodies no longer interrupted by her shrill directives. Life, as it tends to do, moved forward with a grace that belied the chaos that had come before. And so, in the quiet moments of reflection, I found myself contemplating the nature of power and its transient hold, how easily it slips through fingers when grasped too tightly. I was no hero, merely an unwilling actor cast in a drama of someone else's making. Yet, in this unassuming role, I had learned the potency of quiet defiance, the strength found in community. Karen would remain a part of the landscape, her influence fading into the shadows of the street she once dominated. But the neighborhood had changed, its spirit unbroken, bound together by the shared triumph over a common foe. A new chapter had begun, one where the pages were yet unwritten, full of possibilities untarnished by the specter of her rule. The morning sun cast long shadows, and as I stood there, watching the world awaken, a sense of peace settled over me. We had won, not just over Karen, but over the very notion that any one person could hold us in thrall. Freedom tasted sweet, like the first sip of coffee on a chilly morning. It was ours reclaimed and firmly in our grasp.